I'm Alex, 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a strange way of showing affection. Some families bond over dinners, some over vacations, some over traditions. Mine bonded over control. Or rather, my father's obsession with controlling everything. He was the type who measured respect in assets, who compared worth by who owned what, and who thought loyalty meant obedience. My brother, Daniel, was his golden child, loud, arrogant, constantly in trouble, but somehow always shielded from consequences. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who worked hard, built things on my own, and kept my distance. At least, I thought I had. Until my last birthday. It was supposed to be a simple dinner. Just close family at my parents' house, nothing extravagant. I had already learned to temper my expectations when it came to birthdays. Usually my brother's achievements somehow got highlighted more than my own. But that evening felt different. My father was in a strangely good mood. My mother was buzzing around setting the table, and Daniel, of course, sat there smirking like he knew something I didn't. I should have noticed the signs. I should have known better. But I didn't. When dessert was cleared, my father reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table to me with a flourish and said, "Consider this your gift." Everyone's eyes turned toward me. For a brief, fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was one of those rare moments where he would show genuine generosity. Something thoughtful, a sign that he actually saw me, not just what I could provide. My heart picked up a beat as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a folded document, thick paper, formal fonts, signatures already scrawled in blue ink. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. It was a property transfer contract. My property. The small two-bedroom apartment I had bought 3 years earlier after working myself nearly into the ground at 2 jobs. The place I had painted with my own hands. The one space that was entirely mine. According to this contract, it was being gifted to Daniel. My father's signature was already there, along with Daniel's. The only blank space was where my name should have been. My pulse roared in my ears as I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. I looked up slowly. My father was watching me with that smug little smirk he always wore when he thought he had checkmated me. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning like he had already moved in. My mother busied herself with stacking plates, avoiding my eyes entirely. I placed the papers carefully back on the table and said, as calmly as I could manage, "Interesting, because I never signed my part." My father's smirk faltered. Daniel's grin twitched. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating, before my father cleared his throat. "It's just a formality," he said smoothly, as if brushing away a misunderstanding. "You don't really need that apartment, Alex. Daniel's starting a family soon. He needs it more than you. You're still young, you'll find another place. This is what family does. We help each other." Help each other. That phrase rang in my head like a cruel joke. When I struggled through school, working nights just to afford tuition, where was that help? When I was patching leaks in my apartment at 2 in the morning because I couldn't afford a repairman, where was that help? But now, when Daniel, who had never kept a job longer than 6 months, wanted a fully furnished apartment handed to him, suddenly it was all about help. I forced myself to keep my voice even. "So this was your plan all along? To take something I worked for and just reassign it?" My father waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be dramatic. It's still in the family. Think of it as an investment in your brother's future. You'll thank me later." His tone was final, as though he expected me to nod and accept his wisdom like I was still a child. Daniel leaned forward then, his smirk fully returned. "Don't make this difficult, Alex. You're not even using the place properly. Half the time you're at work or staying with friends. I could actually build a life there. You should be proud to contribute." The audacity of it all made my chest tighten. My own brother, looking me in the eye and saying I should be proud to give up everything I had built so he could contribute nothing and still win. My mother finally spoke then, her voice soft but sharp. "It would mean a lot if you signed it, dear. Don't create tension over something small." Small. My home, my sanctuary, reduced to something small. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Inside, I was seething. A storm was building, but I knew better than to let it explode then and there. I studied the contract again, then folded it neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice controlled. My father seemed satisfied with that answer, mistaking it for surrender. Daniel grinned triumphantly. But inside, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to let this happen. Not this time. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the couch staring at the walls I had painted, the shelves I had built, the tiny details that made the place mine. My mind replayed every word, every smirk, every manipulative glance. They thought they had cornered me, that I was too timid to resist, too desperate for their approval to fight back. But they didn't know how much I had grown. They didn't know that years of being overlooked and dismissed had hardened me, had taught me to be patient, to plan, to watch for the perfect opening. I opened my laptop, pulled up the digital copy of my deed, and checked every line. My name was there, clear and unchallenged. My signature was the only one that mattered. Whatever papers my father had drawn up were useless without it. But the fact that he thought he could get away with it, that he could steal from me and call it family duty, burned deeper than anything. I knew this was only the beginning. He wouldn't let it go. Neither would Daniel. And if I wasn't careful, they would find another way to tighten the noose. That was the night I decided. I wouldn't just defend what was mine. I would make sure they never tried to take from me again. But first, I had to play along, just long enough for them to reveal how far they were willing to go. And I didn't have to wait long. The following week, the cracks began to show. My father was never the type to wait patiently when he thought he had leverage, and Daniel thrived on rubbing salt in wounds. It started with little things, snide comments, subtle reminders, and attempts to corner me into giving them what they wanted. A few days after the dinner, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up some tools I had stored in their garage. As soon as I walked in, Daniel was sprawled on the couch with his shoes off, watching TV. He muted it just long enough to say, "So, when are you handing me the keys? Might as well save yourself the trouble and get it over with." He said it casually, as though it was already a done deal. I didn't answer. I just grabbed what I needed and left. But my silence only seemed to embolden him. That Friday, I came home to find him standing outside my apartment building, leaning against the front door like he already lived there. "Forgot your spare?" he asked with a grin, jingling a set of keys. My stomach dropped. I'd given my parents a copy when I first bought the place, just in case of emergencies. Somehow, Daniel had gotten his hands on it. I forced myself to stay calm, though inside I was furious. "You shouldn't be here," I told him flatly. He shrugged. "Relax. I was just checking out my future place. Dad said it's only a matter of time." I figured I might as well get used to the neighborhood. I wanted to rip the keys out of his hand right then, but I knew that would only feed the fire. Instead, I unlocked the door myself and stepped inside. "Get out, Daniel. Now." He lingered a moment, smirking, before finally leaving. But the message was clear. He wasn't going to stop pushing. Over the next week, the pressure grew. My mother called me one evening, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "Alex, honey, I think you should really consider signing those papers. It would mean so much to your father. He's been working on securing Daniel's future, and this is part of it. Don't make things harder than they need to be." I could hear the rehearsed nature of her words, like she was reciting lines from my father's script. My father himself was less subtle. He called me the next day, his voice sharp with impatience. "This isn't up for debate, Alex. You'll sign. It's family property anyway, not just yours. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for the support we gave you." Support? The only thing they had ever given me was doubt and criticism. That apartment existed because of my work, my late nights, my sacrifices. But arguing with him was useless. He wasn't calling to discuss. He was calling to declare. I started noticing little intrusions after that. One Saturday morning, I came home from grocery shopping and found Daniel's car parked in my spot. When I knocked on his window, he just rolled it down, sunglasses perched on his nose, and said, "Just keeping it warm for myself." Another time, I found my living room window slightly open, even though I never left it that way. A picture frame was tilted on the shelf, and I could have sworn the position of my mail on the counter had shifted. It was subtle, but enough to make my skin crawl. Daniel had been inside. I began changing locks, adding a deadbolt, and keeping my important documents tucked away in a locked box. My father noticed the changes when he stopped by unannounced one afternoon. He frowned at the new lock and muttered, "Paranoid, aren't we?" I didn't answer, but inside, I knew they were testing boundaries, pushing, waiting for me to crack. The emotional toll was heavier than I expected. Every day felt like a battle of wills. At work, I struggled to focus, knowing Daniel might be snooping around my place. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations, wondering how far my father was willing to go. I was angry, yes, but beneath that was something deeper, a gnawing sense of betrayal. The people who were supposed to support me were plotting against me, and worse, they didn't even see it as wrong. One evening, I visited my parents for dinner out of obligation. The conversation started out normal enough, my mother fussing over food, my father asking perfunctory questions about my job. Then, midway through the meal, my father casually said, "I've already told some of our relatives that Daniel is moving into your apartment. They're very supportive. They think it's the right thing to do. Don't embarrass us by dragging this out." Daniel laughed, clinking his glass against mine. "Yeah, don't make this awkward, Alex. Just sign. Everyone's expecting it." Something inside me snapped, though I didn't show it. Outwardly, I smiled politely, excused myself, and drove home in silence. But in my mind, I was already laying out the pieces of a plan. If they wanted to play games, I'd play. But I wasn't going to be the one who lost. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. And that was when things really started to spiral. Walking into the lawyer's office felt surreal. I'd never imagined I would need to take legal action against my own family, but by then, the tension had built to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I explained the situation to Mr. Lawson, an older man with sharp eyes who had clearly seen every flavor of family dispute. He listened patiently as I laid out the details, my father presenting me with a pre-signed contract, Daniel using the spare key to sneak into my apartment, the increasing pressure to hand everything over. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Your name is on the deed, correct? You hold the mortgage, you pay the bills." I nodded. "Then let me make this perfectly clear. They cannot touch it without your consent. What they're doing isn't just manipulative, it's borderline harassment. You have every right to shut this down immediately." His words should have comforted me, but instead they lit a fire. If I had all the power here, then my father and brother's games weren't just cruel, they were desperate. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, when in reality, I held all the cards. Before I left, Mr. Lawson gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me. Don't confront them directly. Let them dig their own hole. Document everything. Every call, every visit, every intrusion. If they step over the line, we'll have more than enough to act. And sure enough, the very next week, they did. It was a Tuesday evening when I came home from work and noticed the lock on my door looked off. The shiny new deadbolt I'd installed had scratches around it, like someone had tried, and failed, to pick it. My stomach churned as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first glance, nothing seemed missing. But then I walked into my bedroom and froze. The drawer where I kept my documents had been rifled through. Papers were scattered across the floor, bank statements, utility bills, and most importantly, the lockbox that held my deed. It was gone. My chest tightened as I stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been. Panic surged, but quickly gave way to cold clarity. Only two people would be bold enough to do this. My father and Daniel. I called my father immediately, my voice low and steady. "Did you take something from my apartment?" He didn't even bother denying it. "I had to, Alex. You weren't cooperating. You're being stubborn, and this is bigger than you. The sooner you accept that, the better." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "You broke into my home. You stole from me." "Stole," he scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. That apartment is family property. We're just putting it to better use. Daniel will be moving in next month. Stop making this difficult for everyone." I couldn't even find words at first. My own father, calmly admitting he'd crossed a line I thought even he wouldn't dare approach. He wasn't just pushing anymore, he was taking. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words, Daniel's smug grin, my mother's silence. I thought about all the years of being second best, of being told I should be more like Daniel, of working twice as hard for half the recognition. And now they had the audacity to take the one thing I had carved out for myself. By morning, my panic had burned down to something sharper. Determination. They thought they had won, that by stealing my deed, they had stripped me of power. What they didn't realize was that the deed itself was only paper. The true records, the ones that mattered, were digital, legal, and untouchable. What they had taken was worthless without me. Still, the violation ran deep. I felt like a stranger in my own home, constantly checking locks, peering out windows at every sound. At work, I caught myself staring blankly at my screen, thinking of Daniel walking through my rooms, pawing through my belongings like he owned them. The following weekend, my parents invited me over again. I considered refusing, but something in me wanted to see how far they would go now that they thought they had leverage. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, lounging at the table with his arm draped over the back of a chair, smug as ever. My father greeted me like nothing was wrong, as though we hadn't spoken on the phone days earlier. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat and said, "We've already started preparing Daniel's move. It'll be easier if you bring the rest of the documents over this week. The transition needs to be smooth." I set my fork down, meeting his eyes. "You mean the documents you already stole?" Daniel snorted. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't act like it's theft. You're being selfish. You live alone, you don't need that much space. I'll put it to better use." My father nodded approvingly at him, then turned back to me. "This isn't a debate anymore. The family has decided." Something inside me shifted then. They weren't even hiding the manipulation. They weren't ashamed or cautious or worried about consequences. They believed they were untouchable, and that was their mistake. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "You really think you can take this from me? That you can just decide it's not mine anymore?" "It's already decided," my father said, his voice final. "Don't embarrass yourself by fighting it." My mother reached out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Alex, just sign. Don't make things harder than they have to be." For the first time, I smiled, not out of happiness, but because I finally saw them clearly. Their arrogance, their desperation, their complete blindness to the fact that I was no longer the obedient son they could push around. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Interesting." Daniel laughed, thinking I was surrendering. My father relaxed, certain he had won. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when the tables turned, they wouldn't even see it coming. After that dinner, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had always known my father favored Daniel, but this was the first time I realized he didn't just prefer him. He was willing to sacrifice me for him. Every childhood memory suddenly felt heavier in hindsight. The way Daniel's failures were always brushed aside. The way my accomplishments were met with a shrug. The way I was always told I'd understand later why he got more. Now I understood. And it wasn't love. It was entitlement. The days that followed were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time I came home, I felt like my walls had eyes, like Daniel or my father had been inside while I was gone. I even caught myself checking my dresser drawers, my closets, the placement of my mugs in the kitchen. When you realize your family is willing to violate your most private spaces, nothing feels safe anymore. One night, after tossing and turning until dawn, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the cold light of my laptop screen. I pulled up my bank account, my utility bills, my mortgage history, every piece of proof that tied me to this apartment. For hours, I just scrolled, screenshotting, saving, compiling everything into a neatly organized folder. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about preparation. But even as I planned, the weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest. There was a moment, one I don't admit easily, when I thought about giving in, just signing the papers, handing it over, and cutting ties forever. I thought about how much easier it would be to not fight, to walk away, to let Daniel have his hollow victory. I imagined myself in some other city, renting some bland little place, starting fresh with no contact. But every time I pictured it, I saw Daniel's smirk, my father's satisfied nod, their belief that they had broken me. And that thought sparked something I hadn't felt in weeks. Anger strong enough to burn through despair. That's when the rise began. I stopped waiting for their next move and started planning mine. I met with Mr. Lawson again, this time with a binder full of evidence. He flipped through the photos of my ransacked drawer, the record of the new deadbolt I'd installed, the call logs from my father demanding I sign. His expression hardened with every page. "They've already crossed several lines," he said. "If they try anything else, we'll take them apart in court." But I didn't want court, at least not right away. I wanted something quieter, sharper. I wanted them to feel the same fear I had felt in my own home. To know what it was like to believe the ground under their feet wasn't theirs anymore. So I started playing along. When Daniel called me one night to ask if I'd finally come to my senses, I kept my voice neutral. "Maybe. I'm still thinking about it." He laughed like a man who believed he had already won. Meanwhile, I put the rest of my plan into motion. I filed an official police report about the break-in, naming both Daniel and my father as suspects. I installed a small, hidden camera in my living room, something cheap but effective, and I moved my most important documents into a safe deposit box at the bank. A week later, the trap sprung itself. I came home one evening to find my front door ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. Inside, Daniel stood in the middle of my living room, holding a cardboard box filled with my belongings. His eyes widened when he saw me, but instead of guilt, his face twisted into annoyance. "You weren't supposed to be here yet," he muttered. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Moving my stuff in," he said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dad said I should just start. You'll come around eventually." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply walked over to the side table where the small camera was hidden behind a photo frame. Quietly, I pressed the button that saved the last 10 minutes of footage. "Interesting," I said softly, and walked right past him into my bedroom. His laughter followed me down the hall, cocky and careless. The next morning, I met with Mr. Lawson again, this time sliding the memory card across his desk. He watched the footage with grim satisfaction. "This," he said, "is breaking and entering. This is theft. And this is exactly what we needed." Within 48 hours, Daniel was served with a restraining order. The look on his face when he realized the law wasn't on his side was something I'll never forget. Gone was the smirk, replaced by genuine shock, as though the universe itself had betrayed him. My father exploded, of course, leaving me a string of voicemails that grew angrier by the hour. My mother's voice, softer but no less manipulative, followed. "Alex, how could you do this to your brother? To us?" But for once, I didn't waver. The court process moved faster than I expected. With the video evidence, the police report, and my lawyer's meticulous documentation, it was a clean case. Daniel had trespassed, attempted to take possession of property that wasn't his, and openly admitted to doing so under my father's encouragement. The judge didn't just grant the restraining order. He made it clear that any further attempts would result in criminal charges. For the first time, my father's confidence cracked. At the hearing, he tried to bluster about family matters and misunderstandings, but the judge cut him off. "This is not about family," he said firmly. "This is about property rights. And Mr. Alex's rights are the only ones that matter here." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. For years, my father's word had been law in our family. Now, finally, someone with real authority was telling him he wasn't king of everything. The fallout was brutal, at least for them. Daniel had to find another place to live, one he could actually afford. My father's reputation in the family circle took a hit when everyone learned he had tried to steal from his own son. My mother, well, she stopped calling for a while. As for me, I started to breathe again. My apartment became mine in more than just name. It became a fortress, a symbol of the fact that I could stand up for myself and win. I redecorated, repainted the walls, and replaced every single lock in the place. It felt like closing a chapter. But the best part came a few weeks later, at another family dinner I reluctantly attended. My father, still simmering, couldn't resist a jab. "So, Alex, enjoying your little kingdom?" I met his gaze calmly, the way I had at my birthday. "Very much," I said. Then I leaned forward just enough for only him and Daniel to hear. Funny thing about kingdoms, though? They only belong to the people strong enough to defend them. The table went quiet. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. And for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no guilt, no hesitation. Because the truth was simple. They had tried to strip me of everything. And in doing so, they had given me something far more powerful. A backbone. And they would never take that from me again.